No, I disagree with that. I don't think it distracts from the rest of the narrative. It just happens to take up a large part of this conversation because I had a point of view about it. You had a differing point of view about it. And naturally, we hashed it out. Up till then, we were agreeing about everything. And when you agree about everything...
Yeah, these episodes suck when we agree on everything, right? Did you go see the latest Marvel movie, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings?
No. And for that, I have to give up my Asian American card, the one that ICE makes me carry. Just kidding. No, I haven't seen it yet, but as a great philosopher Samuel L. Jackson once said, there's a motherfucking Delta variant in this motherfucking theater.
Whoa. Language, Colonel Fury. I just figured you'd really be into a movie like this.
Right, because I'm Asian.
Well, no, dude, remember, I'm Asian too.
Technically, yes, but I've always viewed you as Asian adjacent. But we can stretch the definition like Dhalsim in Street Fighter.
First of all, I'm South Asian. And second of all, yoga fire!
So, we're not talking about Shang-Chi then?
I don't think so. I might try to go see it. But my real question then is, what stereotypical Asian thing can we read a comic book about?
Junji Ito.
Spelling bees! I'm Roman Segel.
I'm Ryan Joe.
And we are two dudes who always got picked last for basketball games, but made it in life anyways. So much so that we now spend our evenings recording a podcast about comic books.
Who's on tap now, bitches?
This week, we are finally reading something a little happier. We are reading Dragon Hoops, written and illustrated by Jean-Lun Yang, the Eisner Award-winning comics creator, who was once just a school teacher.
At Bishop O'Dowd High School in Oakland. My cousins actually went there.
Go Dragons!
Go Dragons!
So Dragon Hoops actually won a 2020 Eisner Award, which is like the Oscars for comic books, alongside Jean-Lun Yang's other awesome comic, Superman Smashes the Klan, which we actually talked about on the second episode of this very podcast.
Call it the Quarantine Comics bump. We should totally go to Vegas and play some bets.
Wouldn't that be like insider trading?
White-collar crime is legal in America, my friend.
You can take that one to the bank. Dragon Hoops is actually a non-fiction account, 5 years in the making, of the high school basketball team at the school where Yang was a teacher before he went full-time into the comic book industry. And like me, and maybe like Ryan, but probably not, Yang is not a guy into the sports balls, which might just be what makes it such a great book about the game. And for some reason, he decided to follow the fortunes of his high school basketball team in their quest for a state championship. Ryan, I've had a long time soft spot in my heart for all of Yang's books, almost as much as your weird predilection for Junji Ito. So I'm coming into this one a little biased, but this book is quite different from most of the stuff we read, given it's grounded in the realities of, I don't know, some pretty normal everyday circumstances. So I gotta know, what do you think of Dragon Hoops?
But do you think I wouldn't like it because it's grounded in the realities of some pretty normal everyday circumstances? Have I created this image in your mind that I'm only interested in a comic book if somebody's being like gutted or turning into a monster?
I would just ask all of our listeners to go check the tape on that one. We literally have a year's worth of proof.
Yeah, that's probably true. Well, I like Jean-Lun Yang. I read ABC, American Born Chinese, some years ago, and I thought Superman Smashes the Klan was all right. I actually really liked Dragon Hoops. And for a bunch of different reasons, one thing that really stuck out at me, and that reminded me of Kumsuk Gendry Kim's two Korean graphic novels, is that one of the things Jean-Lun Yang addresses head on is the trouble that he has trying to build this account of this basketball team, not knowing what to tell, and occasionally even exaggerating certain things for dramatic effect. Like, for instance, a conversation that took place over text message, he actually dramatizes a face.
The meta narrative was just such a pleasant treat. Like him talking with his wife, him talking about the design of characters. Like, the book is about the author's discovery, but stepping out as the author and not really breaking the fourth wall, but just letting us peek behind the curtains of how do you make a graphic novel.
And I think that was important for this book because the danger with Dragon Hoops is that it just is about a bunch of ragtag. They're actually not a bunch of
It
ragtag
turns into a
guys
Samuel L.
because,
Jackson basketball movie.
well, yeah, like Bishop O'Dowd is a pretty dominant basketball team. It's just their issue is just they haven't won the California State Championship. But and everyone there is pretty talented. Some even matriculate to the NBA. So, but Yang's honesty in confronting his troubles, trying to tell this tale and to tell it accurately, all of that really elevates it. So it's not just a story about a bunch of kids playing basketball. There are other things he does as well. He integrates elements of the history of basketball. Yeah. He really tells the personal stories of each of the kids who's on this team. And he also confronts a lot of issues involving race and basketball.
Yeah, I've really just accidentally discovered Yang years ago and have just been really, he tells these interesting culturally angled stories. And so when this book was announced, I didn't want to get it actually, but we were in the midst of a pandemic and it seemed happy. And again, I'm not a sports guy. So I was like, why would I want to read this? But okay, it's Gene Luen Yang. Maybe it's good. The pleasant surprise of not being a sports fan and enjoying this book. The pleasant surprise of discovering that Gene Luen Yang struggled with that exact same thing in the discovery to writing the book. I love the moments at the front where he's literally like, oh shit, the book is just staring me in the face. And they show so many scenes of him and his family and like just staring up at the ceiling at night, playing back conversations he's had with other people. And not just in the decision to make the book, but the decision in how to make the book. I don't know, just that spoke to me. And this just bigger narrative of everyone, it's not even a metaphor because they just like hit you over the head with it, everyone like stepping into the ring or taking that first step that's shown repeatedly. But I don't know, I'm just in this weird stage of my own career, so like seeing that, especially reading it the second time around, like just I don't know, got me pumped up. Like sports get people pumped up.
Well, that's actually also a big thing that Yang is able to do. He's a talented illustrator, no doubt. He illustrates his own graphic novels, but he's not like one of those standout illustrators. And one thing that he does really well, though, is convey the sense of drama in the basketball scenes. He's really good at that.
So, well, he's drawing it like superhero action, and that's what was so funny.
That's to me that wasn't the case. When I think of really dynamic illustrators who putting the human body in weird positions, crazy angles, like Frank Quietly, for instance.
I was going to say Rob Liefeld, but okay.
Rob Liefeld is another great example, another American treasure.
I wouldn't use the word great, but yeah.
He's great at drawing feet. He's great at drawing pouches. He's great, Roman. Don't deny it.
Make comics great again. Sorry.
But he's Gene Luen Yang is really, really good at, I don't know, it's like the pacing, it's the way the panels are interspersed, it's the silences. He's really good at creating the sense of drama. So you have no idea whether one person is going to make the basket that's going to win the game or not. You feel that tension in the pages. And that was actually something that I thought was really, really striking, because even though you look at the illustrations and they're well done, but they're not like, holy shit, how did you do this? The way he tells a story visually, though, the pacing, the close-ups, what he chooses to put in panel, all of that, he consistently creates just a wonderful sense of drama within each game. It almost felt like you're watching one of those Disney movies, right? Where you don't know whether the basket's going to go in or not at the end. And it feels very, very cinematic.
Well, I think we talked about this during Year of the Rabbit, actually. As I've gone into like nonfiction indie comics over the last 10 or so years, I have a real admiration for the artistry of cartoony. Again, which is not what Frank Quietly, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld,
yeah, he's cartoony.
But
I know, yeah.
It's something you talk about, like a lot of the drama and the play out, like, are they going to make the shot when the coach has to think about something, and really the tension in that space between moments, it's all done in the expressions of the faces or the body language. And somehow it's more easily accomplished in cartooning than it is classic comic book penciling, which is trying to imitate life, whereas cartooning is trying to almost like convey emotions better.
Yeah,
and I think
that's a good way
at the top of his game with that.
That's a good way of describing. I'm just thinking of another basketball game that remember X-Men when we did Jim Lee's X-Men. There's that
Yeah,
basketball
yeah.
game, and it's
It's an action scene. It's all just an
it's an
action.
action, right? It's an action scene, but I think like the really I don't want to say like the realistic illustrators like Jim Lee because obviously they're not that realistic, but the more conventional superhero illustrators they tend to focus on the dynamic poses
Exactly.
or yeah and yeah as you mentioned Yang really focuses on the drama and the tension. It's stuff that isn't really it doesn't really matter how good you are drawing the human form. It really matters how good you are as a visual storyteller, and actually Yang is a master at that.
And as I'm flipping through the pages as we talk through this and I'm looking for scenes, something I'm even appreciating, and as like an OCD want to be designer some days, not just the page layouts like the Scott McCloud, the Bill Watterson like panel layout, but even like the page layout is very intentionally done. Like the drama from one page to the next in some of these action scenes of basketball games. You can tell there's a level of intent or intentionality to it. And again, I'm wondering if that's in the art of cartooning. When you strip down everything, you have to rely on the architecture of the page even more. You have to rely on the architecture of the facial expressions and the eyes and the glances even more. And it's
There's less
place.
opportunity to hide when you have like really elaborate illustrators. They might put something in shadow basically to hide the fact that they have trouble drawing something, or they'll use certain gimmicks. They'll use like or they'll draw big guns or something flashy that can distract you. A cartoonist like Yang, there really is no place to hide because every line, as you mentioned, is intentional. There's nothing extraneous about the illustrations, and it's not flashy, but it's incredibly powerful. In fact,
Yeah.
sometimes he uses like certain panels seem to repeat themselves, but all of that is like I
Design.
mentioned earlier, by design, it's meant to slow you down and creating a sense of drama by slowing down the time.
Something I've noticed also in, again, the last 10 years of reading a lot of indie cartooning graphic novels is the use of sound effects and onomatopoeia, right? So obviously the lettering is great, be it the swishes and the dribbling, the papa, the kathunk. But even I've noticed this in the last few years, you literally have sound effects for things like hurl, catch, grab, and it adds not an obviously funny comedy to it, but just a lighthearted nature of I'm trying to express this the best way to express what's happening. It's not just pow, bam, smack, pump. It's take, run, walk away, things like that are happening.
It's unpretentious and it's just a shorthand to really make sure it's very clear what's happening. I think when you're doing these static shots of somebody passing the ball, without seeing that in motion, it can be really, really confusing. And so just having pass and integrating it as part of the graphic element, the word pass, it it looks like a sound effect. But it also very clearly conveys exactly what the hell is happening on this page because he doesn't have the advantage of showing it in motion.
It's funny. Usually we salivate or criticize the art at the end of an episode, and it's interesting that we spent a lot of time on the art at the front. But my next question is like, how'd you find the story? How'd you find the broader narrative of the dragons' march to victory?
I felt that the march to victory was inevitable, though Yang does seed it with some doubt along
Because
the way.
he's writing it as he goes. He doesn't know what's going to happen.
There are a lot of mysteries that are unveiled in the book, but he acknowledges, hey, you could just Google it. You could Google these people's names, and you will know exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably smart of him not to focus too much on will they, won't they, because again, this all happened. This is a true story. It happened in the past, and so
it's about the journey and who these people are. It's almost like when you watch the Olympics, those vignettes they show you, even though Michael Phelps won, you need to hear the story about like him picking up grocery for his grandma. Like,
yeah, that stuff almost it makes it feel like it's almost facetious in a way because it's like the feel good narrative of the Olympian athletes at NBC just foists down your throat.
Sure, but sorry, but this is done in a more genuine way. So, for example, when you show the Sikh basketball player dealing with racist commentators, those moments happen after you've already set up Jivam's background. right? And how he talks to his mom about these things and his whole perspective. So it's like the character moments are established, and then you see some, and it's not even major action. You just see something happening with them, and it has more depth because you now know more about this because you spent 10 pages talking about the background of a character.
Yeah, it helps you realize who these characters are. But I was also thinking about who was it? He was talking about, was it Austin? One of the basketball players who was just he really admired. He was really, really good. But
Oh, the
he
shorter one. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but he admits later on he's focusing on this positivity to not have to talk about one of the coaches at Bishop O'Dowd who left a huge impression at the school, Mike
Mhm.
Phelps, and that was something. And that's actually an issue that Yang wrestles with visibly throughout the book. Like he actually confronts the fact that I don't really want to include this guy Mike Phelps, and that was actually a really interesting decision. The way he eventually did. So Mike Phelps was the winningest coach in basketball in California, the winningest basketball coach in California history, and then he was charged with molesting a student in the 1960s, and that was like a huge deal. Then just complicated because there's a lot of ambiguity over whether he did, whether he didn't. The accuser was anonymous. There was only one accuser, and the charges against him were actually dismissed, but he was still asked not to return, so he left in disgrace, and that's a big question mark because Mike Phelps really defined the legacy of basketball at Bishop
Well, and
O'Dowd.
worth noting because the main coach in the story was
Was a protege of his.
was a protege of his. He played basketball for this man, and it, it's like this inescapable ghost that hangs over everything, and Yang tries to avoid it. And they
Yeah.
show conversations with his own conscience, conversations with his wife about what to do, what not to do, and even like the premise of this entire comic book is a lie because it's my own interpretation of it. I just found that entire narrative of him talking to himself to be really fascinating. It was the best
Yeah.
conclusion to it.
I will say the mystery of why Mike Phelps left was actually like just looking at it purely on a construction level, it was a good dramatic device to get you through the story because it actually is like this central mystery for a part of the book. And it really does create some odd darkness where there hadn't been any before. When it's revealed what he did, while the conflict is really, really interesting, I was
Allegedly
actually
did.
what he
Allegedly did.
allegedly did. The conflict was interesting. The conflict that his fellow coaches had about the situation was also like really interesting. But I wasn't sure why it was such a big issue for Yang to include it.
Because it wasn't part of the narrative of the story he wanted to tell. The story he was trying to tell was the journey, again, the nuanced character study, but the journey of this today's basketball team. And he didn't want to get bogged down in the controversy of the past. That's
I don't know how you not tell it. How I didn't. It doesn't seem like a big deal to just allude to it. I don't know why it was this big thing that was haunting him. Basically, it didn't seem like when it was revealed, it was like, oh, that is a really tragic, screwed up situation. I'm not sure why this was such a big albatross hanging around your neck as you were trying to tell the story.
I want to push back on that a little, and because it's something I actually dealt with on another podcast. It's as the producer of this thing, Yang being the producer of the book. So I interviewed an executive for one of my other podcasts a couple months ago, and the episode just went live recently. But in the actual interview, the executive said some things that he was being very truthful in the things that he said, but they were a little troubling, and they didn't paint him in a great light. And I went back and forth personally with the decision, do I keep it in or do I edit it out? Because it takes away from the narrative, the purpose of this other podcast and what it's supposed to be about. And it almost invalidates some of the stuff he might have said at the front, which still has value. And so I went ahead and edited it. Like I literally left it in originally months ago when I finished the episode, but as it was going live, I did one last listen. I was like, ugh. And I tell you that because Gene set out to do something, and this other distracting element could have taken the entire story, could have twisted or tainted the narrative. We've already said it, like no matter who, as you're listening to this, we just said that one of the coaches of this team was accused of molesting someone. Now, whether or not that actually happened or not, all of a sudden, you've now made your conclusion about this guy, right or wrongly. It's just human nature. So it almost taints it. And so Gene was going through, I can empathize with, do I keep it in or do I keep it out? Do I keep it in or do I keep it out? And
Yeah.
maybe he made the wiser choice than I did. And again, it's apples and oranges, my situation is, but I can really empathize with that. Do you keep it in or do you keep it out? Is it helping the story?
What did the executive say?
I'm not going to say that.
Oh, you can tell me and edit it out, or say it at a high level.
The purpose of this other podcast is mentorship conversations with very big name executives. And by the end of the episode, it got into a very MAGA political rant. And again, everything said prior to that was really, really good content. Like really great. It's a great episode. And it almost just like, it changes your impression of the person when you hear that. And I don't know if that's intentional. Maybe that's deserved, but it didn't serve the purpose of the podcast. And so I think that's something Gene was going back and forth with, is like, does this serve the purpose of this book and this story I want to tell about O'Dowd today and the current coach today and his crew today? And he made a decision that, well, you can't hide from it. This is a pretty big name thing. We have to address it. And I think his choice to address it was because the relationship the prior coach Phelps had with the current coach. So,
yeah, I think Yang absolutely had to address it. There's no way around it. Is it not this part of the story he wants to tell? Yeah, but to that I say too damn bad. It's part of the story anyway. And if there are aspects of the story that you don't want to tell, then maybe you should rethink whether you want to tell the story in the first place. So, and he handled it well, honestly. It's not like suddenly the story just detours into this strange case of did he or didn't the former coach molest a child. It's something that he acknowledges, and he also acknowledges the ghost of the accusation. And it, in the end, it actually, the way he handles it shows not only the complexity of how Mike Phelps's former coworkers and colleagues felt about him, it also showed what it did to his life, especially if the accusation wasn't true. So I think it was an important thing to keep in, but I also don't, for me, because I would think you got to leave it in. You just got to find a way to integrate it. That's more the question for me. How would you integrate it? Not should I keep it in or not? To me, there's like 0% chance that you don't at least acknowledge the complicated past.
But even to get a little to meta on you, we've now spent probably 10 minutes of this podcast. And again, it's an important part of the story, but getting distracted in the argument of that. And I'm not saying it should or shouldn't have been in there, but it's so interesting because that's not what this book was about. And we literally just spent 10 minutes talking about that. Is it an important piece to the dramatic arc? But if anything, it's a side story.
Yeah, but that was our decision to do that.
No, but
then it became a debate. So that's why it's not like
I'm happy to argue. That's what I love about this podcast. But what I'm just saying is that's where Yang's indecision came from, right? It's like, if I do this, this will distract from the other narrative. And as proven in our decision.
No, I disagree with that. I don't think it distracts from the rest of the narrative. It just, it happens to take up a large part of this conversation because I had a point of view about it. You didn't, you had a differing point of view about it. And naturally we hashed it out. Up till then, we were agreeing about everything. And when you agree about everything,
and this episode sucks. These episodes suck when we agree on everything, right?
But that's the truth. This is the point where we disagreed about the conflict that Yang had. And in litigating that, it, created a little bit more, it dragged out the conversation in this direction. If we disagree, if we disagreed about the art, we would be focusing on that.
That's fair. But what's funny about this podcast is I don't like gushing on books. I really don't. And there's less tension, there's less fun, but I genuinely just like this book, and I'm trying to minus that thing. What are the things that we disagree about? Because I wasn't sure, like I said, the first time I heard about this book, I wasn't sure about it. I read it. I remembered enjoying it. I put it on the shelf and I decided to just move on because it was fine. It was really good, but it was fine. And it didn't occur to me that we should read it again until it got nominated for an Eisner, right? And it felt like a different book. There's a bunch of other Gene Luen Yang books that I would like to read on this podcast, but I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did the second time around. And
Did
maybe that's
you?
because I was paying more
Yeah.
maybe that's because I was paying more attention to the craft versus the first time around I was just reading the story for the sake of reading the story.
What changed the second time around?
Yeah, I already knew the story. Like I already knew the story.
But
I
did
already
you?
knew
Did
how
you? Yeah, but did you notice anything that you didn't notice before? Was there something?
yeah,
Did it
the
resonate with you
intent
differently?
almost everything we said at the top, like the intentional nature, the broader meta narratives that were at play, and just I had more of an appreciation of Jin Lun Yang's skill. Um, because Superman Smashes the Klan, he was just the writer, not the writer and the artist. Versus American Born Chinese, he was the writer and the artist. Boxers and Saints, 2 books I hope we get to read by him later. He's the writer and the artist. So to just watch him execute his craft of both writing and drawing at the same time, just I feel like he's at the top of his game. No pun intended with this book.
Yeah, of all of the things that I've read, well, of the three things I've read of Yang's, this is my favorite, and I think it's because he just unleashes a whole bunch of really cool storytelling tools. He just integrates biography and history, and then he's got this
Documentary.
documentary. Yeah, and I really liked American Born Chinese. I will say it's been like about 10-15 years since I've read it, so my memory of that might be hazy. I actually do remember he does use a similar device with the character's conscience talking to him. In
Yep.
American Born Chinese, it was Sun Wukong also taking the form of Chinky, the Asian caricature, and that was the way he litigated his own thoughts about race. And then, of course, here you see it at the end where the cartoon version of his wife says, "Well, I'm not really your wife. I'm just a cartoon version of her, and then I'm actually your conscience thing." But I felt here he did so much more. You really do see like the full breadth of his storytelling powers. And then with Superman Smashes the Klan, obviously he didn't illustrate that one, but I felt as much as that was a look at race, it was much more straightforward. It felt like it was geared towards a much
It was a very
younger
special
audience.
episode. Right.
Yeah, I felt like it was more for like kids versus this book and American Born Chinese felt very, very personal also in a way that maybe Superman Smashes the Klan didn't.
I'm very curious to see how you feel about some of his other writing. Something about Yang, because of my appreciation of all of his independent work. But
Yeah.
so one of the plot points in this book is I love the pie chart. I could really relate to the pie chart of 50% of me is my family, 25% is my teaching job, 25% is making graphic novels and comic books. And things like American Born Chinese, Boxers and Saints is actually featured in this book when he has the unboxing with his family. But so another part of Yang's story in this book is the decision. He gets a gig with DC to write Superman, right?
Right.
And that whole decision process of what he's choosing to do. And I bring that up because I'm very biased to Gene Lin Yang, and so obviously when he started getting the keys to Marvel and DC's assets, he actually did write a pretty decent run on Shang-Chi for Marvel and some runs for Superman and a few other things. And I've read all of them, and I don't like them. Like,
Wait,
it's
really?
so
Why?
yeah.
Why not? Okay, no. I haven't. So I haven't read his superhero stuff. Why don't you like him doing superhero stuff?
It's just not his strength. I'm sorry. It's just like it's a unique take. It's pretty good. Like I recently ahead of Shang-Chi, I was like, oh, maybe I should read all the Shang-Chi stuff. So I read some old stuff, and when I discovered Jin Lun Yang did a run on Shang-Chi for the past year, I was like, let's read it. And it's so interesting because all of his indie stuff, American Born Chinese, Boxers and Saints, Dragon Hoops, read as or are marketed as young adult. And they come off as like very mature is the wrong word, but they're speaking to young adults like adults who are just young, not like kids books. And all of his superhero comics that I felt like I was being talked down to. Like he's literally writing animated series scripts. Like, and it's fine, it's good, it's entertaining, but and maybe that's because I shouldn't just be I'm an old man. I shouldn't be reading superhero comics. Maybe he was writing superhero comics for his kids, but he writes American Born Chinese. He writes Dragon Hoops for the adult in us. So it's like I like that Brian Bendis and Mark Waid and Matt Fraction tell these really complicated stories about Wolverine and Hawkeye and Batman and blah 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 blah, but they're really simple. Like they're just really simple, straightforward, and they're fine, but they don't give me like the visceral wow, that's a great comic
Mm.
reaction that I get from all of his indie stuff.
It's interesting how certain writers. I was thinking about Alan Moore, and I love his work with conventional superheroes. I feel like the constraints of the superhero genre is what really makes him shine as a writer. And then when he does stuff that's a little bit more personal, or when he has carte blanche to do whatever the hell he wants, things get just really weird and not in a particularly good or interesting way. I'm thinking of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, like the first 2 volumes are fantastic. And he's adhering to all of these, he's like paying homage to all these literary devices. But the third book is where I think he's able to just do whatever the hell he wants. And it gets so weird and strange that you basically lose track of what the hell is going on. And so maybe in a way, Gene Luen Yang, again, I haven't read his superhero work, but maybe he's the opposite, where his personal stuff, the stuff where it's like fully in his control and he's not trying to cater to millions of fans, that's the stuff that really brings him out as a writer. Versus the stuff where he's employed by DC and he has to adhere to whatever the editors at DC want him to do, and he's got to respect the character and all that stuff. That's just not where he
Well, it
where he
feels
plays.
like it's also these other works are more personal.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
that makes sense. He's really obviously it's part of the narrative in Dragon Hoops. He's a character in the story, but when the books are deeply personal, he shines when he's performing on a stage for Superman, for Shang-Chi, etc. Again, this is my perception. At some point, go read them and let me know what you think. But it's just like I was expecting more. And again, he has set such a high bar for himself with his independent work. And almost all of his independent work I've just loved.
Yeah, but you see that in movies also, right? Like John Woo, he does some amazing work with like Hard Boiled and The Killer. And then he comes and does Mission Impossible 2, and it's like
I think the official title was Kickin' Impossible, but yes.
yeah, but it's not uncommon, right? You have a really cool indie creator, and then they do something a little bit more mainstream, and it's there. You see what made him special, but it's like, eh. Again, though, I have not read Gene Luen Yang's superhero work, his stuff for DC or Marvel, so I'm talking out of my ass. But I did read Superman Smashes the Klan, so.
But that one was very different. That wasn't mainline continuity, and that's what made that one special. Actually, so fun fact, like Superman Smashes the Klan was his first mainstream work that I read, and I was blown away. So then when I wanted to read his Superman run or his Shang-Chi run, I thought I'd have that same experience. But again, Superman Smashes the Klan, for all intents and purposes, it's in continuity, but it's an Elseworlds tale, right? And it was based on a radio drama, right, that he was reinterpreting and reimagining. So I don't know.
The next Gene Luen Yang book we read will be Boxers and Saints then, rather than his run on Superman or Shang-Chi.
We could. I was actually gonna suggest Shang-Chi for the week of Shang-Chi originally, and then I read it and I was like, no, not deserving. One other moments that are just worth calling out, because we actually didn't spend as much time talking about this book, and I'd highly recommend folks read this book. But
yeah, no, we talked a lot about the child molestation, and we talked about how his work with superheroes is inferior.
Well, we gushed on the art, and
Yeah.
but every time he profiles a character, I mean, I love how every chapter opens with just a full body portrait of the character. Chapter 8, Jivan. Chapter 9, whoever's chapter 9, right? And you really go into their backstory. You show Gene talking to them. You show the person telling a story of their life. You sometimes show some tension in their life. And I was almost reminded of Lost. One thing I loved about the show Lost is every show moved the plot along, but 50% of the chapter of the episode was diving into the character's background and just really getting to know them deeply. And it was almost like rhythmic. Every chapter did that. And you have to imagine he was arranging the characters and arranging the unveiling of the characters in a very certain order, because things with those characters would start to happen in the subsequent chapters.
Yeah, I didn't know if he was doing it in a specific order, or at least I didn't catch that. But I definitely like respected the way he made some of the chapters like specifically devoted to certain students or certain standouts at Bishop O'Dowd. He didn't actually some of the people he profiled weren't actually even on the basketball team.
Yeah, it would suck, because they do make some references to the making of the comic. I keep coming back to Jivan, but it's like, oh man, those pictures you posted online of the characters are really cool. And Can you imagine if Mr. Yang or the Yangster or the Yangulator, I really loved the kids' names for him, but Mr. Yang interviewed you and took your life story and then you don't show up in the book? How must that feel?
Actually, one thing I liked one of the students said, "I don't like the way you draw my hair." And
Yeah, that was Jivan.
he says,
That was Jivan.
"Yeah," and he says, "I'm gonna try to, I'll fix that." And then the next panel, he fixes the hair. It actually reminded me a little bit of, did you ever see The Wolf of Wall Street?
I did, yeah.
So he's like, "I drove a red Lamborghini," and then he's like, "Wait, no, it was a white Lamborghini," and then the car like changes color in the middle of the.
Yeah.
I just really love when the text, well, or in this case, it's the comic or the movie is just completely like playing with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's self-referential, but the gimmick is used. It is employed thoughtfully to move some of the things along, because the whole point of that hair scene actually had to do with, how do I make sure a brown person looks different from a black person? I wanted to make sure. And again, I don't know if there's a bias on, because again, he's Sikh, I was raised Hindu, but even the whole explanation of Guru Nanak, when I first read this, and the part where his anger at Gandhi, that educated me.
Oh yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that.
Well, I took pictures of those pages several months ago when I first read it, and I sent it, as I'm working on another project that does involve Gandhi. And I remember taking pictures of those pages and sending it to the people I was collaborating with at the time. And it's actually caused me to, literally, these 2 pages have caused me to think about that part of the narrative of the project I'm working on. So
yeah, that was actually a version of Gandhi or an interpretation of Gandhi that I'd never seen either. One that looks much less favorably.
To be very clear, Gandhi is a complicated figure, and there's a lot of things he did right in the macro narrative of history. But there's a lot of stuff about Gandhi, man, that he's no saint. It's just what I say. He's a very controversial figure, more so than you would think, because you would think like Mother Teresa and Gandhi, they're the best.
Oh, Mother Teresa's a controversial figure these days too.
I did not know that. I hope there's a graphic novel about it.
Yeah, her whole thing was that suffering, well, I'm paraphrasing and I might be wrong, suffering brings you closer to God. So she willfully, a lot of the people she cared for, she did not give them like anesthesia or any succor that would help their pain, because she thought that suffering would bring them closer to God. Of course, when she's on her deathbed, she gets her drugs.
The epidural. Yeah.
Mother Teresa got her drugs.
We didn't talk nearly enough about this book.
That's the title of this episode. Roman, Mother Teresa got her drugs.
So Ryan,
yeah,
I think we've said not nearly enough about this book because we both like too much of it, but it's that time. I gotta ask, what are we reading next week?
Next week, we're going back to the world of weird-ass comics with The New World, comics from Mauritania by Chris Reynolds. And you're being like, what? I have never even heard of this. And there's a good reason, because this is an indie comic that was created in the 1980s. And I will tell you, it is like unlike anything that you have ever read before. It begins with a man returning home to an empty house, and it just gets stranger and stranger and stranger until it starts to begin to feel like you're an alien visiting a strange world. That's the sensation
how I feel every week on this podcast.
But not this week. This week you had your upbeat fun, but next week, Roman, it's back to more eccentricities.
I'm all about the eccentricities.
Yes, indeed. We'll see you there.
And that's our show. Like what you heard? Be sure to share with a friend, subscribe, and leave us a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. See lots of pretty pictures of the books we read at qtdcomics.com. And since we're sure no one's listening, prove us otherwise. Shoot an email over to say what I got right and what Ryan got wrong. qtdcomics@gmail.com. Give you a social media handle, but we're old, and that feels like too much work. I'm Roman Segel.
And I am and have always been Ryan Joe.
I used to think that I could not go on, and life was nothing but an awful song. Now I know the meaning of true love. I'm leaning on the everlasting arms. If I can see it, then I can do it. If I just believe it, there's nothing to it. I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. I think about it every night and day. Spread my wings and fly away. I believe I can soar. I see me running through that open door. I believe I can fly. I believe I can fly. I believe I can fly. See, I was on the verge of breaking down. Sometimes silence can seem so loud. There are miracles in life I must achieve. But first I know it starts inside of me. If I can see it, then I can be it. If I just believe it, there's nothing to it. I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. I think about it every night and day. Spread my wings and fly away. I believe I can soar. I see me running through that open door. I believe I can fly. I believe I can fly. I believe I can fly. If I can see it, then I can be it. If I just